Of course, television, like any medium, has got its limitations. And that is, I'm always hearing this from television producers who said to me, "Oh, Julian, we can't say that, because where do we get the pictures? I mean, you've got to have the pictures, you see, in order to illustrate the point." And of course, because it's a picture medium, image is frightfully important, even one's own image. I mean, I have to say it, I'm afraid, I was sometimes encouraged, as in the film I made about the Mediterranean, to take off my gear, because they said the ladies like to see you in your shorts. Well, I suspect that they were right, because I used to get a lot of fan mail, and most of it was from middle-aged ladies, and it's possible that one of the things they like to see was my legs, dare I say it? Yeah, well, I've said it. Anyway, I did it because you do anything for the ratings, don't you? But it's one of the reasons, actually, why I think overall I prefer working in radio. I'll tell you why. First of all, because I grew up on radio. I grew up in the 1940s when radio was all important, because it was during the war and we were all getting our news from the radio. And we all sat around this great big Bakelite radio set and heard Mr. Churchill and all that. And then I was always listening to what was called the home service, which later became Radio 4. And I still listen to the radio, far more than I watch television, I have to say. And eventually, when I had the chance, I went and worked in radio and enjoyed it hugely. And here's a selection of some of my favourite programmes.
I'm feeling very nervous, but very, very happy.
Tell me, why does this have to be secret?
Because at the moment in the Roman Catholic Church, I can't go my way without punishment.
Never in 45 years of broadcasting have I witnessed or reported on an event remotely like this. I can't tell you where in Europe it's happening, or reveal the identity of the principal person. I can tell you that we have gathered in an improvised chapel in a large upper room of a private house. Now, why the secrecy and the melodrama? Because this is described as a catacomb ordination, and the candidate for priesthood, a Roman Catholic, is a woman. In this week's Crossing Continents, Crossing Europe, we look at this strange clandestine event against the background of a Europe that is increasingly secular, and where the traditional established churches are being increasingly challenged. The chapel itself is impressive. It's a whitewashed room about 30 metres long with timber beams. There are only about a dozen people in the congregation. Those conducting the service, the so-called bishops, have no authority. They were long ago excommunicated by Cardinal Ratzinger, long before he became Pope Benedict XVI. A large cloth has been laid on the floor, and the ordinand, the young woman, is now prostrated upon it. It's a great paradox that among the voices you can hear is that of a former priest, Anselm Sorster, who in his youth was a friend and study companion of, yes, Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI.
I knew him as a very young teacher for theology, and I visited him personally, and we have the same professor at the University of Munich. We spoke about theology and also about music.
About music?
Yes, we both were very fond of Schubert. And Ratzinger has also his piano at the Vatican.
Oh, he still plays?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me this, what do you think he would say if he knew what you were doing this morning?
Oh, outside he would be friendly at any rate, but inside he would be very angry.
I think you would agree that there is no chance that women could become priests during his papacy.
Yes.
No chance.
No chance. No chance.
But surely by defying the authority of the church, you are weakening the church, aren't you?
I think it's only on the surface.
It's superficial, Dan.
Superficial.
Yeah.
Yes. But the inside, it's very important for the future of the church.
Ich bin bereit.
Gemäß dem Evangelium in Wort und Tat zu verkünden.
Ich bin bereit.
I am ready, she says. Ready to be ordained and take on the responsibilities of the priesthood.
Ich bin bereit.
But she must know that the Vatican will take a very dim view of what she's doing. Last night, here in the chapel, I asked her how she's feeling about this act of defiance.
I'm a little bit worried about it, but I hope that perhaps in 5 years, in 10 years, things will change, because there are many women who would like to go the way after me, and the way is a little bit better prepared for them.
But then I must ask you, what can you do as a priest without revealing your identity?
In future, I hope I will be a priest and I can do all that things that the men priests can do.
Because, I'm sure that the church would say, well, if a woman wants to serve the church, she can be a nun. What's wrong with that?
It's nothing wrong with that. I like nuns and it's okay, but not for me. I'm a strong person, and some women, they are in the ceremony in the background. Yeah. And I like it to be in front of them. And I feel when I was younger that the place where the altar is, that's my place.
Der du Miriam gehört hast am Ufer des Schildmeeres. Wir bitten dich, erhöre uns.
They've all now grasped hands in a circle around the altar. And one of the bishops, she's being embraced by all of the bishops in turn. And this, I think, is effectively the end of the ordination service. Straight out of the service, and you're now a deacon.
Yes, I'm a deacon.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling very, very happy, and I'm feeling strong. I hope to carry out the duties in future like a male priest.
But in how many years do you think that's going to happen? Realistically.
I don't know, because God decided. And I hope it will be soon, but I'm young and I can wait.
We're still in the chapel. Everyone's very cheerful after the service. And I'm with Patricia, who is one of those conducting the service. And you, I understand, are a former Dominican sister. Is that correct?
That's correct. For 45 years.
And how did you become ordained?
I worked at a seminary. I was educating young men to be priests. And during those years, and even during my former years when I studied theology in Rome, I became very upset at the unfairness of being excluded from ordination. And my feeling was, it's so damn unfair.
I don't think anyone would deny that a woman can be as good or even better in their theology as a man, but nonetheless it is still against the rule of the church. Therefore, this ceremony that you've just been conducting, in fact, is meaningless. The Vatican would say it's null and void. It doesn't mean a thing.
They would say that. However, I grew up in South Africa, and we had some very unjust apartheid laws which excluded black people from all sorts of things which are human rights. And one of the main ways to change an unjust law is to break it.
But Patricia, the church would argue that you're challenging God's law. which you just can't do.
No, we're talking here about a human law. This is in canon law. It's not part of God's law, it's church law. And canon law has been changed a number of times through the centuries. It's a human law. It's not God's law at all, and an unjust law need not be adhered to, as we learned in South Africa.
Tell me, how do you get on with ordinary Roman Catholic priests? I mean, when they know, if they know, what you are and what you do?
That varies enormously, from absolute terror and rage to, my God, to, well, maybe you've got a point. At the university where I study here, nearly all the men there are priests, and they are absolutely horrified. They want nothing to do with me. Nothing.
Well, clearly we needed authoritative comment from the Vatican and managed to contact the president of the Pontifical Council in Rome, Archbishop John Paul Foley. Firstly, I put Patricia's point to him, that to exclude women from the priesthood is so damned unfair.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm a man, and biologically I cannot conceive. I cannot have a child. Is that unfair? By divine decision at the beginning that there is this difference? I don't think that it's unfair.
Biologically, it's impossible for me to bear children.
Yes.
Biologically, it's not impossible for a woman to be a priest.
We're not saying biologically it's impossible. We're saying theologically it's impossible.
Well, therefore, it's not a fair comparison that you're making.
I don't know about that, because God is the origin of biological law and also theological law. Some of the greatest saints in the church have been women. There's a universal call to holiness, and we believe that the greatest saint in the church is the Blessed Virgin Mary. It has been women who have perhaps given the greatest challenge to holiness in the church. They've been the principal teachers, formers, catechists. They've done exceptional work, and I would hope that all of us would strive for holiness and not for power.
A few years ago, there was a much-reported case of the Danube 7. I'm sure you remember it. 7 women who went through an ordination service on a boat on the Danube. Now, if such a thing were to happen again, how does the Church regard a service of that kind?
As invalid. Not just illicit, but invalid.
And, of course, it has happened, something we can now reveal. But does it really matter? One of our concerns has been that a ceremony regarded as illicit and involving such a tiny minority of dissidents is quite without significance. A point I put to Patricia.
I think that all the big things that have happened in the church, perhaps in the world, have been done by small groups. And I think that the small group of women and men that Jesus gathered around him at the time were regarded as irrelevant, and that nothing much would ever come of that. And look what's happened.
It's the day after the ordination, and I've come to a beautiful little Baroque church just down the road from our improvised chapel, and I'm about to peep inside. Everything here speaks of continuity and tradition. And you'd imagine the congregation would be opposed to female priests. Am I right or wrong? After the service, I'm going to ask some of the worshippers. Excuse me, do you agree or disagree that there should be female priests in the Catholic Church?
I agree that women are priests. For sure, I think it's okay that women can get priests. They should allow it, yes.
Well, Elisabeth, yes, I agree.
Anneliese, I agree.
Albert, I agree. My name is Harald. I agree with women priests, and they should be allowed to marriage.
Of course, this is not a scientific poll, but in this seemingly traditional community, every person, young and old, who was questioned, supported the idea of women priests. So I put it to the Archbishop that such views cannot be ignored forever.
Well, I don't think you win a war by surrender. The question is, what did Jesus want? What did he reveal? And what does the Church authoritatively teach in the name of Jesus as the understanding by the apostles and by the bishops since then regarding what they are authorized to do? And that's the norm by which we must judge, not by public opinion polls.
The Archbishop may not regard public opinion polls as important, but he cannot ignore numbers. That same congregation that welcomes women priests is also in decline, as the church warden confirmed.
The number of people visiting the Mass is dropping down each year. We fight against this, but it's so difficult.
That's a familiar story. Throughout the whole of Europe, congregations are on the decline in the established churches. But since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the restoration of religious freedoms, people are attending newer Pentecostal and evangelical churches, rather than their traditional places of worship. The missionaries have come from far and wide, sometimes from unexpected quarters.
My own mission in the Ukraine is to impose God upon the whole society.
I'm up to my knees in the river Dnieper, in the middle of Kiev, capital of the Ukraine, and it is the most extraordinary spectacle. What you're going to hear are perhaps 200 men and women, young and old, wading into the water and being baptized. Strangely enough, this is a rerun of something very similar that happened here almost 1,000 years ago. As according to the legend, Prince Vladimir was converted to Christianity and then insisted that all of his subjects also convert. So he had them marched down to the river Dnieper and baptized in much the same way, I imagine, as it's happening here today. There's one very big difference. Those being baptized here today are not being received into the Orthodox Church, but into the Embassy of God Charismatic Church. And another big difference, that the pastor who is receiving them is Nigerian. He's a black man with his fast-growing, all-white Ukrainian flock. Those about to be baptized are all lined up at the water's edge. Behind them there are small children splashing in the shallows, stark naked. As I say, there's definitely a carnival air about the whole event, which is growing a little more enthusiastic right now because the pastor has arrived. Pastor, hello.
Bless you.
How many people are you bringing into your church?
Every month, maybe 1,000.
Every month? Just describe to me what will happen in the next few minutes now that you've arrived.
I'm still considering, should I go into the water today or not? Because for me, this is not hot enough. As I guess the river is a bit cold for me for now.
Well, the pastor's now gone to lead the worship, and he's starting to dance along with the music. And as you can hear, he's been given a big greeting by the people who are here to be baptized. People like Ivan, who's still dripping wet from his immersion. Now, Ivan's got quite a story. He was convicted and sent to prison for murder, and he's on temporary release thanks to the work of the Embassy of God Church. How do you think that you will be changed by this experience?
This moment was the moment that he was waiting for, and now he says that he feels himself completely clean from all the sins, and he wants never to come back to his old life.
Well, what does this church give you that the Orthodox Church does not give you?
He says that particularly this church gave me right understanding of who God is, and awareness of who are we, and awareness of right direction in life. This is what gave me this church, and I couldn't find it in other churches.
It's noisy, it's hot, and it's very colourful. From the balcony of this huge sports centre, I'm looking down on an astonishing scene. I'm told there's space here to seat 5,000. Well, the seats are irrelevant. Most of the congregation is standing, and many of them are dancing. On the stage behind a band, a choir of 70 or so is belting out an endless repetition of praise. Some of the worshippers seem to be almost in a trance-like state, and I've just noticed Pastor Sunday coming in his brightly coloured yellow shirt, leading a line of dancers and carrying the Ukrainian flag. It's been described as show business, and yes, in comparison with the solemn ritual of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, that's what it looks like. Well, after the Embassy of God service in that vast sports hall, I suspect I'm in for a very different kind of experience. I'm now walking into the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the middle of Kiev. And, well, this is something deeply, profoundly and utterly different. It's an extremely ornate building. The screen behind the altar is richly carved, and there are literally dozens of pictures of the saints. I'm here with Father Alexander, and I'm interested to know what he thinks about this Pentecostal invasion of the Ukraine.
Значит, то, что происходит в той общине, которую вы посетили вчера, это грандиозное шоу, построенное по законам шоу-бизнеса.
The religious sect that you visited yesterday is nothing more than show business. There is a high cultural tradition in Ukraine, like through the theaters and opera houses. But today, they're only half full, because the people find it easy to digest a lower TV pop-style culture that is also being offered by Pastor Sunday.
Are you surprised that somebody from Nigeria, a black man, can come in and be as successful as Pastor Sunday?
Это не странно, потому что мы живем в смутное время.
No, I'm not surprised, as Ukraine is living in unstable times, and the people have little spiritual, social or material security. Pastor Sunday has simply been cleverly filling this void that has been created by the fall of communism.
If it's filling the spiritual need of people, isn't it something that should be welcomed?
Нет. Объясню почему. То есть одна из причин...
No. Let me explain why. The traditional churches are considerably to blame for not providing a spiritual foundation for the people, since the country has gone through such dramatic changes in the last 10 years. The struggle for the people's souls in these churches is effectively the struggle for their money. And one of the most important elements to these new churches is the request for a fixed 10% of earnings. In Ukrainian mentality, money and material possessions are not the determining ones.
It sounds to me, Father, that you're suggesting that the Orthodox Church needs to change quite dramatically. I mean, it sounds like a reformation.
Я думаю, что мы стоим на пороге реформации.
I think we are on the edge of a reformation, and I believe we are about 500 years behind Western European churches. A reformation, I hope, can bring about a return to the apostolic norms of life and Christianity.
As you probably know, there have been attempts to get rid of Pastor Sunday. Do you think the authorities should take action against him?
Это возможно только в том случае, если
I am categorically against any legislative limitation of human religious freedom. But this leader uses this freedom to actually take away people's freedom. Then I'm categorically against this.
Father Alexander will not be happy about Pastor Sunday's ambitious plans for the future. He intends to build a stadium in Kiev, a huge place of worship, to accommodate what he believes will be an ever-growing flock. And he agreed to take us to the spot where he hopes his dream will be realized.
You know, it's going to be like a sports palace in the US. That's the understanding you have, like a cultural center, like a sports palace.
Yeah. And what's it going to cost?
Between 10 million and 20 million US dollars.
And how are you intending to raise that?
I don't know yet. Everybody has always told me it's not possible. Everybody, even me, I've told it myself it's not possible to do it. And I've been able to do everything so far. And I'm sure this is going to be done. We need a miracle. And this is going to be a story of another miracle.
You do believe in miracles, don't you?
Oh, big time. Everything about this ministry is miracle.
I was talking to an Orthodox priest yesterday, and he actually said it's all show business, is how he described it.
If he says it's show business, that is a big compliment. Some people have gone to the extent of saying, I give $20 to each person who comes to church, and that's why people come. And some people have gone to say, this is not a church, it's a drug cartel, because it's a Nigerian citizen. In fact, we had police for 3 years following me. Then the KGB said, we don't need to do anything with that church. We have investigated everything you could investigate. Nothing.
While in Kiev, we came across Edgar, a former member of Pastor Sunday's congregation who'd worked for him as a sound engineer. Edgar strolled into our hotel lobby one Saturday morning, determined to air his views on the Embassy of God Church and its founder.
Диктатура.
He says that dictatorship was the style of leadership from Pastor Adelaja, and this put him off, as people were treating Sunday Adelaja almost like a god. He says it was a totally authoritarian regime, reminding him of the old communist regime, treating people like zombies.
Why do so many people join this church? Is it because they want authority, do you think?
Дело в том, что здесь много причин. Люди обмануты.
He says yes, it appeals to them. He says that Ukraine has lived for so long under a dictatorship, and right now, when there is this freedom for everyone, there is the wish for some dictatorship to return in some form. And that form is in Pastor Adelaja. But in reality, they have been given false messages and not really following the Bible, but just following Pastor Adelaja and his books and listening to his sermons, like they listened to Lenin and Kuchma in the past. Sunday Adelaja lives in a very wealthy, luxurious life, and they have a lot of servants in their house. He also has lots of land and property around Kiev. People are mainly attracted to the personality and high emotion of Pastor Sunday Adelaja, and he is teaching the gospel of wealth, and this is sweet to the ears of poor people in Kiev.
Why do you think that he's been able to attract people in politics and prominent people?
Учением о благосостоянии. И я бы сказал так, что эти
Politicians who get into the church are not real believers. They're there to attract votes. And the church believers are then encouraged to vote for these politicians, who are members of the church.
It's very easy to be cynical about Pastor Sunday. There's plenty of examples elsewhere of congregations being exploited by unscrupulous clergy. But in his case, there's no evidence of a lavish lifestyle. Nevertheless, I wanted to challenge him with some of Edgar's accusations.
We have actually baptized through this church in 11 years over 1 million people. One other thing that they have used to try to accuse us, that this is a totalitarian sect, that people, when you come in, they don't allow you to get out. They just make you to become a zombie. But it's not true. If that is true, we have made all the 1 million people to stay. We give people the freedom.
People do say that this kind of success, money theology that you're preaching is not the real Christian message, that you shouldn't be telling people that God favors you by bringing you wealth.
No, I don't believe that myself too. That sounds more like American prosperity preaching, which I am against personally. But what I do here is that because of the state of things in this country, I believe that if Christians will not go into business and into every sphere, that the country will still be in this state for a long time. And these people here, they are used to living on government subsidies, and they are used to depending on the government for everything. I want to beg my people, please begin to do your own personal business. So my teaching on money is more like empowering people. I don't have a house for myself. I don't have a place where I live. I just have an apartment.
I'm told you have a very big, expensive house and a lot of servants.
Well, maybe they are prophesying.
And you have a big limousine as well.
You see that's the car, the red one. But still, God bless them. But, that's one of the things that I'm really against myself in Western charismatic churches and Pentecostal churches, even in Nigeria where I come from. I go to Nigeria to preach against this kind of thing, especially in a poor country.
And now you're
38.
38. Yeah. Okay, what will you be doing by the time you're 58, do you think?
I will be doing exactly this thing I'm doing in the Ukraine here on the magnitude of the whole of Europe.
The whole of Europe?
Yeah.
Ukrainians are not used to having black people amongst them. But even those who dislike Pastor Sunday or his theology do concede that his people do valuable work with drug addicts, alcoholics, and other socially excluded groups. His following has grown partly because he's recruited 700 local Ukrainian pastors, men and women, who filled a need. They run soup kitchens in Kiev, feeding over 2,000 people every night. They run 24 drug rehab centers across the Ukraine and have 5 orphanages in Kiev alone. Pastor Sunday is tireless and ambitious. I asked him where he gets his energy and inspiration.
I'm not doing anything new. I am simply doing things like John Wesley did. He was praying like that every day. People like Martin Luther or what John Knox did. I just see myself as one of them. Those are my heroes.
So he's not singing from a new hymn sheet. The idea of a black John Knox or John Wesley will certainly cause outrage in some quarters and delight in others.